Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Namaste Tomorrow. Friends, the logistics sector is the backbone of any country's trade, and India is no exception. With the introduction of national logistic policy, the logistics sector is going to get a further boost. And with a target of reducing the logistic cost from current 16% of GDP to a global standard of 8% by 2023, we'll see the Indian logistics market will be around $215 billion in next 2 years compared to $160 billion as of now. And to meet this target, logistics sector is embracing new technologies such as warehouse automation, artificial intelligence, and machine learning. Autonomous vehicles, sensors and IoT, robotics, blockchain, big data, and analytics. I think so. These are the emerging technologies, and logistics sector is ready to take on. To tell us more about how logistics sector is gearing up to embrace new technologies by partnering with the Indian startup ecosystem, we have today with us Laxman Phansalkar. He is Explorer Program Lead India at Maersk Global. Maersk Growth, my apologies. Laxman leads the South Asia chapter of Explore at Maersk Growth, the venture client arm of the Danish logistics giant Maersk. Before joining Maersk Growth, he spent 15 years in Maersk core business, holding several client-facing roles. So, good morning, Laxman, and welcome to Namaste Tomorrow.
Good morning, Utpal. Thank you very much for inviting me to this web series.
So, Laxman, I think so. I'll start by asking a very a layman question. Logistics sector is, as I mentioned, it's a backbone. And in your view, considering the amount of time that you have spent in Maersk, and which is basically a global giant in logistics sector, how do you see with the current change in the environment? How do you see role of digital transformation and technological innovation will play out in logistics sector in general and specifically in your company?
So I think working with Maersk for the last 15 years has given me the opportunity to interact with senior executives in companies working in every sector of the economy that you can imagine. And one of the very strong messages that come out from our customers is that innovation is now the need for innovation is an existential need, right? It is necessary in order to continuously innovate because there are so many changes in our environment. And particularly for corporates like Maersk, we are very acutely aware that if we don't innovate, then that there is a possibility that we will fail to meet the evolving needs of our customers, who themselves have to innovate and evolve based on how their customers and consumers evolve. So that's it. So you can look at innovation as a core process in the business, and you can think of innovation as a way to essentially protect your gross margins. So there are companies very much like Maersk who believe that it's necessary to create innovative products that are better capable of addressing the needs that our customers feel today and the needs that we anticipate they will feel in the future. And therefore, we'll be able to protect our gross margins through that. And then there are other companies that believe that they operate in a more or less commodified kind of market, but they still need to innovate in their operations so that they have that cost advantage and they can ride out market cycles more robustly. There are two areas in which I think innovation has, innovation in these two areas has become a very hot topic, and we get to talk to other enterprises in the logistics industry as well as our customers very often in these two areas. The first one is in the area of sustainability. I think even before you start counting the carbon emissions of the business, the economic case for adopting some sustainable technologies, for example, electrifying last mile distribution fleets, the economic case is strong enough. And that's even before you start counting the environmental impact of that technology. And if you take a long enough term view, that's true for practically every other kind of technology aimed at reducing carbon emissions and the impact of the environment. The second area in which I think the second theme in the innovation space that has become a very how should we say active space is the collaboration between corporates and startups. I think a lot of corporates have realized that their supply chain strength, their operational strengths combine very well with the innovative and fresh thinking that startups tend to bring to the table. And this collaboration between corporates and startups takes many different forms. So at Maersk, the engagement with the startup ecosystem falls under Maersk Growth, which, as you correctly said, is our corporate venture arm. And there are two complementary tracks at Maersk Growth. One is an investment arm, and we invest at an early stage in startups who we see as allies in our mission to digitize logistics, decarbonize supply chains, and to democratize access to supply chain data. And the other track at Maersk Growth is what we call the venture client arm. The venture client arm or the venture client engagement model that we follow is use case led, but it is vertical agnostic. So we're not specifically working on our core products in the venture client arm. And usually we identify an area in which we want to innovate. We find an external scale up who has built a product that we can do a paid POC with. And the aim is, after a successful paid POC, to scale that solution across the enterprise, but we remain in the capacity of a customer of that scale up. And Maersk Growth now has seen success in a pilot that we ran in a few places, and now we have our headquarters in Copenhagen, but a chapter in Asia Pacific, in North America, in Europe, and the South Asia chapter in Bangalore, which is where I am.
Right. So, Laxman, I think so. The next question, and as you rightly pointed out, I think collaboration between startups and corporates, it's a must. And when it comes to logistics sector, I think so. Startups are considered to be, torch bearer when it comes to disruptive and technological changes. So, do you see, how these startups can play a catalyst role in the corporate ecosystem?
Yeah, you used a very interesting word there. Yeah, you used a very interesting word, Utpal. You said disruptive technologies, right? And that's kind of been the sort of popular rhetoric in the media about the engagement between startups and corporates as some kind of David versus Goliath story. And it makes for great reading, right? When you read the story of Netflix versus Blockbuster, you feel it is a David versus Goliath kind of situation, and many executives in corporates have been guilty of using this language that if we don't innovate, then somebody with a laptop in some part of the world will invent something and steal our lunch. But in reality, I think the relationship between corporates and startups, increasingly the better way of describing that engagement is a collaborative approach. And I think so the big benefit that startups bring to the table is in terms of their starting point, right? If the issue with people like me who've been in the business for 15 years is that how we have got here, our journey to the current moment, is a big burden on our thinking. And sometimes it can sort of narrow our peripheral vision and even cause us to miss gaps in the market that do exist, but we don't spot them. But startups don't have that problem. Startups, for them, the present today is their starting point. There is no burden, there's no legacy. So injecting that fresh perspective can really create innovations that seemed inconceivable earlier. And the other benefit is that when you bring innovative thinking, I don't like to use the word disruptive, I will say innovative thinking, and combine that with the kind of wealth of data that a corporate would have and their supply chain strengths and their operational strengths, you can not only create something, but you can also scale it very quickly. And therefore, consumers and society at large can get the benefit of that innovation really fast. So at Maersk Growth, like I said, we do have an investment arm and a use case led engagement on the venture client arm. But a big part of what we do is actually actively engage with the startup ecosystem to find out what are the gaps that founders have identified that we may have missed. And then when we see something like that, and it's actually quite surprising how often we see that, we bring it back to the business to talk about how we might pilot something like that in our business and create something more meaningful for our customers and for the community at large.
So I think so. One word that you have also, mentioned, innovative technology. It's not just disruptive, and that's where the collaboration is required. 15 years in logistics sector, Laxman, how do you see, the current engagement between the corporate and logistics sector and startup ecosystem? And do you believe that there are few things that is required or that can be considered to create an engagement between logistics sector and startups?
So, from the startups perspective, India is a market that offers you endless opportunities, right? If you're a B2B startup, you have large multinational corporations, you have very large domestic corporations that you could work with as your client. There are also thousands upon thousands of MSMEs that you could target. If you're a B2C startup, then you have customers in every imaginable shape or form in terms of income, in terms of their attitudes available. So I really empathize with the founder's problem of how do you create a focused and effective go-to-market plan in a market as rich an opportunity as India. That has to be difficult, right? And to maintain that focus on a consistent basis. Uh, the one thing that I will say is that, based on some of my interactions with the startup ecosystem, is that it's necessary for founders to beware not to fall so deeply in love with what they're building that they forget the people that they're building it for, right? So that customer centric mindset in not just your go to market plan, but also in terms of what you're building and how you're sequencing the development of your product is essential. But it cuts both ways, So in November, I was part of a panel discussion which involved a couple of startups and a couple of corporates, and one of the participants was a founder of a SaaS company, and he said there are two problems, right? One is to identify a corporate in India who is serious about innovation, right? And that was a revelation to me to say that they're serious about innovation. I think, in meeting rooms we talk about innovation, but does that talk really cascade in our actions? So that was an eye opener for me, right? And the second thing he said is that once I find a corporate who is serious about innovation, the issue is that large enterprises tend to be fairly tedious bureaucracies, right? And a proposal or an idea has to travel through multiple desks before it actually takes some kind of shape. And even if you find a champion in the corporate to push that idea through in the business, the champion himself may lose patience and abandon the project. And that's a shame, I think, because there is a real benefit, not only for the startup to land a large enterprise account, but also to the corporate to be able to collaborate with the startup on an innovation area that either may take too much time and effort to build themselves, and that is assuming that they spot that innovation area, right? So that is what I think needs to happen. Corporates need to be a little, how shall we say, more agile. And at the same time, you need to also bring some additional focus that the engagement with startups is not going to be the same kind of procurement conversation you would have on a normal basis, because you're dealing with something that is at the edge of conventional technology. And that's the focus that people like me at Maersk Growth try to bring in our business.
No, absolutely. I think so. And for a collaboration, it's both startups and corporate needs to be agile, needs to understand, each other's requirement, respect them, and grow together. I think so. That's the most important thing. So, in your entire journey, and I'm talking specifically from Mars, which are the sectors, emerging technological sectors or emerging technology ideas that you believe will impact to your company?
So the mission at Maersk is very clearly spelled out, and that mission is that we want to improve life for everyone by integrating the world. What we want to do by when we say that is we want to be able to give our customers the ability to optimize their supply chains from end to end, right? And many companies will say that they provide end-to-end supply chain solutions, but a true end-to-end solution is uh, still on the horizon. It isn't really available today, and I think Maersk is one of the few companies that is marching very steadily towards achieving that true end-to-end supply chain management goal. So there are basically three things that we have committed. One is to provide this end-to-end logistics solution. We will need to find ways to infuse digital and technologies in logistics processes. right? And that's a very vast area, and I don't think it does justice in our conversation to go into now specific which technologies. But digitizing logistics is one very important area for us. The second problem that we want to solve, it's a little counterintuitive, because every entity in a supply chain today creates more data and collects more data than ever in history, right? But at the same time, the end-to-end visibility of a supply chain is still an unsolved problem. And because end-to-end visibility for supply chain is unsolved, the ability to optimize end-to-end is also an unsolved problem, right? So that internal plumbing to democratize access to that supply chain data, enabling each entity in the supply chain to achieve what you call a global optimum instead of just focusing on optimizing their particular step. That is the second problem that we are trying to solve. And that's a very difficult one. Also involves a lot of different technologies that we could experiment with. So that's the second area. The third commitment that we've made is that in our operations, we will achieve net zero by 2040. Right. So now, considering the significant scale of our operation in maritime freight transport, in air cargo, on overland by truck, overland by rail, that is a huge ask. Right. So the energy sector and innovation in alternative fuels and carbon capture, you name it. Right. So these are the three areas that are of the greatest interest, not just for Maersk Growth, but for Maersk as a company overall.
Absolutely. I think so. Net zero is something which is clear in an objective laid down by most of the corporates. And, innovative technologies, as you rightly pointed out, will play a key factor into it. So, in your experience, how the logistic sector is coping up with this particular milestone of achieving net zero. As the inorganic growth is picking up steam in last few years, do you believe
Yeah.
logistics sector is also looking at building some kind of innovation centers within the corporates, or they are looking at partnering or buying the startups in the who's basically creating technologies for logistics sector?
So it comes down to the old build versus buy debate that very often is spoken in the media. I would say both, right? There are. I mean, companies realize that it's important to put their own heads and resources to solve this problem. But at the same time, we also recognize that there are many other very innovative people and very intelligent people who might come up with it too, and it behooves us to help them also to solve that problem. Specifically from a net zero point of view. So at Maersk, we have a whole team dedicated to decarbonization. And not only are they working internally to discover, to experiment with technologies that will help us achieve net zero by 2040, but they are also very feverishly engaged with the clean tech ecosystems across the world to identify partners who may have built something or whom we could nurture to achieve that goal in the future.
Absolutely. And I think so, Lakshman, one thing that you have mentioned is corporate innovation. I think so. This is something which is very critical for a corporate because it's one of the method to engage with startups. So, what's your take on it? How you have basically embarked upon this corporate innovation journey, and do you believe that there has to be some kind of a methodology which a corporate need to follow in order to achieve this innovation program?
So like I said, at Maersk, when typically the phrase corporate innovation is used, we are talking about essentially the engagement between corporates and startups, right? So at Maersk, that engagement comes under Maersk Growth. And Maersk Growth has an investment arm, and that's focused on investing in startups at an early stage who are working on tech that isn't mature yet, but we believe will have a strategic impact on our business and help us create something meaningful for our customers along our three-pronged mission to digitize, democratize, and decarbonize supply chains. The other is the venture client arm, and that's really very interesting, because the venture client arm is not just focused on transforming the supply chain for our customers and in our business, but transforming Maersk as a company. So we are vertical agnostic, and we will help drive digital transformation in every part of our business, from human resources to legal and procurement and finance, and of course our core products and operations. So, but what the venture client arm does is it identifies use cases in very deep collaboration with our several business teams, and then we identify scale ups. So mature startups, and a good proxy for what we mean by mature is a company that's raised Series A and has a C-suite, and started taking the shape of a company. So we collaborate with scale ups to solve that POC. Solve that use case through a paid POC. And then once that POC is successful, we want to be able to very quickly scale that across the enterprise, and that's why the focus on scale ups. But your question also about having an innovation budget and corporate innovation, I think a lot of people will agree with me in all industries that innovation is fundamentally a core need. So whether you achieve innovation by building it yourself or you achieve innovation by collaborating with others, it is still part of a broader aim to innovate and to keep up with times and to do things that will help sustain the environment and sustain the company. To build something that will sustain changing customers' mindset, that customer centricity, it goes beyond just providing good customer service. You also need to build products that will help address customers' needs, and very often customers need help to identify what is it that they need. For instance, none of us knew that we needed an iPod till a few of us got our hands on an iPod. Right? It wasn't a felt need. So building something that customers will need is not as straightforward and easy as you would think. And in my opinion, and it sounds a little aggressive to say this, but if a company does not have a very clear framework and a budget allocated for innovation in general, then it shouldn't have a budget for anything else, because that is a very risky game to play.
Yeah, absolutely. I think so. This is very critical for any corporate to consider as they embarked upon a corporate innovation journey. One thing that you have mentioned about matured startup, what is a general perception is the innovation journey for a startup. It starts at a very early stage. So by the time they reach a maturity stage, there are various phases. So in your view, which are the phases at which corporate should start partnering with the startup? Is it at an early stage, where you actually help them in creating and advancing upon the technology journey, or do you believe that corporate should start looking at them once they become a mature, because that's a vast difference between two stages.
Yeah, I don't think that question has, at least in my personal view, I don't think that question has one answer. I think there is a value in corporates identifying early stage companies who are working on something very promising and then nurturing them, because it depends on how you select that startup at the end of the day. But let's assume that identification process is robust. Then you've identified somebody who's working on something that is likely to have a strategic impact on your business and on your industry in general. Then it makes a lot of sense to nurture that company and use your resources to help them grow and go to market. And while you're doing that, also leverage that to the benefit of your own business. So there is a value in doing that. On the other hand, you may have use cases in your digital transformation journey in the business that are not necessarily sort of innovation spaces that are new. So it may be innovative for you to or for your sector, but as a particular use case, it may not be brand new. And you will find scale ups who are able to solve that very quickly. And the benefit of such an engagement is that once you have done a POC and seen the benefit of that particular solution, you can then scale it quickly across your organization and make the impact in your business that you wanted much faster than building it yourself would, or going to an early stage. So there is a value in engaging with clients, with startups in across the development sort of spectrum.
Absolutely. So and a question from Maersk's perspective, given that you have already embarked upon this journey, what is your outlook on Indian startup ecosystem for next 3 years? And are there any specific area of interest for Maersk for engaging with startups?
Yeah. The Indian startup ecosystem is the third largest in the world, if I'm not mistaken. But I also think it's a fairly young ecosystem in that a lot of innovation and a lot of very interesting businesses are yet to arrive on the scene. There are four trends that I am personally very excited about, and at Maersk we are watching very closely. The first one is the involvement that the governments in our country, both the center and the state government, have in nurturing the startup ecosystem. You find initiatives at the state level. You have a startup policy that the finance minister is expected to announce during the budget. And, for example, T-Hub in Telangana, you have KDAM in Karnataka. I just recently heard the CEO of KDAM speak about opening centers of excellence in places like Mysore and Bangalore, outside of Bangalore, because their belief is that the next wave of innovators is going to come from these cities and not from the Bangalores of the world. And that's a really exciting perspective and very forward-looking approach that you see from the state governments and the center government. And I think that, and because of that, I believe that our ecosystem is yet to experience the real growth that is possible from a country with the kind of deep talent pool that we have. The second trend that is particularly exciting is, nowadays when we interact with startup founders, we notice that there's a lot of maturity in how they speak about their business models, how they speak about their go-to-market strategies. There was a time when it seemed that we were satisfied with building the Uber of this category and the Airbnb of that category. But now when you speak to founders, they have a very deliberate approach about what they're building, about the customers that they intend to serve, about the context of the market in which they are operating. And to a large extent, mentors like yourselves at 100x.vc and others are to be thanked for this rapidly growing maturity. And for that reason, the third trend is that I believe we are not just building valuable tech and valuable products in our company, but we are in our country, but we are building valuable companies. And so I don't know necessarily in the next 3 years, but I think we will see a lot of IPOs from Indian startups, and acquisitions by a corporate will not be the only available exit. Now, it might sound a bit controversial for me to say IPOs right now, because some of the recent IPOs of homegrown startups have not gone particularly well. But I think some revolutions have an underwhelming start, and this will be a trend that we will see. And we will be able to say that we are not just building valuable technology, but we are building valuable companies in our country. The fourth trend that to me personally is very exciting. And this is an area where at Maersk we are also watching very closely, but not necessarily in the public eye, is the work that is going on in deep tech. Right? So just in the last 3 months, thanks to being a member of an Industry 4.0 alliance, I've had an opportunity to speak with startups working on material handling and shop floor automation and warehouse automation and so on. The one that made the biggest impact on me personally was this Bangalore-based startup that said that we are building material handling robots for the manufacturing environment that will adapt to the conditions that already exist in the factory. Now, it's incredibly powerful to say that we are building a technology like this because, typically when you want to deploy robotic solutions in your factory, you have to first create Goldilocks conditions for those robotics to be able to operate efficiently, right? And so it's not just the capital expenditure involved in acquiring and installing those robots, but it's also creating, so essentially reinventing your factory that acts as a barrier. But this company says we will short circuit that by creating robots that will adapt to whatever lane markings exist and whatever lighting exists, and the robot will manage to perform efficiently in spite of non-standard or non-specific kind of environment. And the growing customer base that they have in India also shows our maturity as an economy, because we are thinking in terms of productivity of labor and upskilling workers, and not just saying that if I want to increase production, I just throw more cheap labor at the problem. So that's really exciting. So these are the four trends that we are very closely watching as Maersk, and I'm personally very excited about. But while we are doing all of this, I have to mention this, that I hope that people like you and I, who are part of the startup ecosystem, would succeed in creating an inclusive environment. Right? In the supply chain and logistics space, it's very rare to meet a startup that has a female founder or a female co-founder. And I read a report by Your Story Media, and it turns out it's not a supply chain and logistics problem. It's actually across industries. And people are very right to say that that will change, and that is changing, and it will happen organically. But I think there should be effort, deliberate effort from people like yourselves and us to accelerate that change.
No, absolutely, absolutely. And Lakshman, at 100x, we follow the same thesis. It's not just about the startup; it's about promoting the entrepreneurship and without any gender bias. And that can be reflected in our latest cohort of Class 8, where you'll see multiple startups having female co-founders as well. So I think that's our step, and that's our take on how to promote startup ecosystem without any biases. Uh, Lakshan, you have actually in your answers set an example how the digital transformation or corporate innovation is playing up in the logistics sector. So what's your view or some thoughts how startup entrepreneurs within the logistics sector can engage with Musk?
With Musk.
Yeah.
So first of all, we are if there is a founder of a logistics or a supply chain related startup, or if you don't know that you are related to supply chain or logistics, it doesn't matter. We are very open to having a conversation with founders of startups who believe they can have an impact on the way supply chains are run, on the way companies that help run supply chains can run themselves, right? So we are very open to having that conversation. The way we will engage with the startup depends, among other things, on what they're working on and the stage at which they are in their development. So if they're working on our three-pronged mission, which is to digitize logistics, democratize access to supply chains, and decarbonize supply chains, then and if they're at a very early stage, then we could have a conversation with them about taking a making a small investment and then helping that company grow. And we are really committed to our portfolio companies and nurturing them and giving them access to resources from within Maersk that will help them build out what they're building and then go to market later on. On the other hand, if you're a scale up, and the interesting thing about our venture client engagement model is that we work across verticals at Maersk. So we have worked on use cases in human resources to help build the human resources of the future. We are also working with a cybersecurity team to defend our company against cyber attacks. We're working with marketing and sales. We are working with our core products. We are working with our decarbonization team. So there is a very broad, scope of engagement on the venture client side. And I would say that you shouldn't even worry about whether you are supply chain or logistics related or not. If you feel that you want to explore an opportunity with Maersk, just get in touch, and I'm very available on LinkedIn at any point in time. Just send me a quick message, and we will definitely want to engage with you. And for all you know, we might even have a use case to work on.
No, absolutely. And thank you, Lakshman. I think so. Great insight on how logistics sector is gearing up to participate in the growth journey of Indian economy. And also, the areas where startups can look at partnering with the logistics giants like Maersk, be it, vertical integration, be it a horizontal integration. I think so. This is very critical and very interesting that you have mentioned. At 100x also, we are looking at contributing to the Indian economy, looking at creating those kind of a partnership between corporates and startups, which can actually work towards, contributing to the Indian economy. So thank you very much, Lakshman. I think so that was a great insight. Thank you for sharing your time today. And we look forward to having you once again on Namaste Tomorrow to share more insights on the, how you are seeing logistics sector gearing up towards 2030.
So, Utpal, thank you very much. The pleasure was entirely mine. Thanks for giving me an opportunity to also speak about what we are doing at Maersk on Namaste Tomorrow. Thanks a lot. Have a great weekend, Utpal.
Thank you. And thank you everyone for joining today's session. Stay tuned for more interesting sessions going forward. Have a great weekend. Thank you.